I still have the key on my keychain. It's a small thing, old-fashioned, the kind that looks like it belongs to a music box or a jewelry cabinet from another era. My grandmother pressed it into my palm at my cousin's Thanksgiving dinner 12 years ago. Not at my wedding. Not at a milestone. Just a regular Thursday in November when the turkey was dry and my uncle was already arguing with someone about hockey. She closed my fingers around it and said, quietly enough that only I could hear, "This opens something important. Don't let anyone talk you out of it." I didn't know what it opened. I asked her. She smiled and said I'd figure it out when I needed to. My father, who had been watching from across the table, walked over and held out his hand. "Let me see that." I showed him. He turned it over once, handed it back, and said, "Junk, she's losing her mind, you know. Don't read too much into it." I put it in my pocket. I never told him I kept it. My grandmother died in February 3 years later. It was the kind of February that makes you understand why people leave Canada. -30, the sky a flat white, frost on the inside of the windows at the funeral home, because the heating system was struggling. She died the way she'd lived, quietly, without drama, without asking anyone for anything. The obituary was 4 sentences. She'd written it herself. I was 27. I had a job I was okay at, an apartment in Edmonton that I shared with a woman named Kira who kept a very large and judgmental cat, and a relationship with my father that had been, for most of my life, best described as managed. As in, I managed my behavior around him. I managed my words. I managed how much of myself I showed him so that the visit or the phone call or the dinner could end without something being thrown or someone leaving in tears. My father's name doesn't matter. I'll call him what I called him for the first 20 years of my life before I stopped calling him anything at all. Dad, because that's what you do. That's what I did. You keep the shape of the relationship even when the inside of it has gone hollow. He was the kind of man who took up all the space in a room. Not physically, he was actually kind of slight, medium height, nothing remarkable about him. But atmospherically, the temperature of every room he walked into changed. People straightened up. They became careful. My mother had left when I was 9, and I'd spent the years after that learning to be very, very careful. My grandmother had been my mother's mother, which meant that after the divorce, my father had no particular reason to make it easy for me to see her, and he didn't. Visits had to be negotiated, justified, worked around his schedule and his moods. I'd missed 4 of her birthdays because he'd had plans. I'd missed a Christmas because he said it was my turn to spend it with family, by which he meant his family, and my grandmother apparently didn't count. She counted to me. After the funeral, there was a small gathering at her house, a bungalow in St. Albert that smelled like Earl Grey and cedar and the particular lavender hand cream she'd used for as long as I could remember. My aunt handled most of the arrangements. My cousin brought food. My father came because I think he felt he was owed some kind of presence at events involving my mother's side of the family. Even when no one had asked him to be there, he spent most of the afternoon in the living room, talking to people he barely knew, occasionally picking up objects and examining them the way people do when they're mentally calculating worth. I found the box in my grandmother's bedroom closet. It wasn't hidden, exactly. It was just there, on the shelf, next to a shoebox of photographs and a stack of Christmas cards tied with kitchen twine. A small wooden box, maybe the size of a hardcover novel, with a brass lock, old-fashioned. The kind that looks like it belongs to a music box or a jewelry cabinet from another era. I stood there for a long time. Then I took the key off my keychain and put it in the lock. It fit. Inside was a single envelope. My name was written on it in her handwriting, which was still the careful, slightly formal cursive of someone who'd learned penmanship in a different century. Underneath my name, she'd written, "Open this at the bank." Not before. I closed the box. I put the envelope in my coat pocket. I locked the box and put it back on the shelf. Then I went back to the living room, where my father was telling someone I didn't recognize that my grandmother had always been a bit scattered in her later years, God love her. I did not say anything. I ate a square and drank some tea and helped my aunt wash dishes, and I drove home in the dark with the envelope sitting on my passenger seat like a passenger. I waited a week. I don't know why. Maybe I was afraid of what was inside. Or maybe I was afraid of what it would mean if it was nothing, if it turned out to be a sentimental letter and a few $100 and my father's voice in the back of my head saying, "Told you." She was sentimental. She was scattered. It's just old lady stuff. But it wasn't old lady stuff. I went to the branch of TD Canada Trust near her house, the one she'd used for 40 years, apparently, based on what happened next. I sat down across from a woman at a desk near the back. I told her I'd recently lost my grandmother and that I had an envelope she'd left me with instructions to open at the bank. The woman looked at the envelope, looked at me, and asked for my ID. I gave it to her. She typed something. She looked at the screen for a moment. Then she said, very calmly, "Could you give me just one moment, please?" She got up and walked to a back office. She came back with a man who introduced himself as the branch manager. He sat down across from me and folded his hands on the desk in the way that people do when they're about to say something they need you to stay sitting for. He said, "Your grandmother was a client here for a long time. She made some arrangements some years ago that we've been holding in trust. I think you should open the envelope now, if you don't mind." I opened it. Inside was a letter, 2 pages, and a set of account documents. The letter was from my grandmother. It was dated 4 years earlier. She wrote that she had opened an informal trust account in my name in 1998, when I was 8 years old. A Henson-adjacent discretionary trust, set up with the help of a lawyer friend of hers, structured so that it would not affect any government benefits I might ever need, and so that it could not be accessed by anyone other than me, and only upon her death or my 35th birthday, whichever came first. She wrote that she'd done it quietly, because she didn't want there to be any interference. She didn't name my father directly. She didn't have to. She wrote that she'd been adding to it for almost 30 years. Small amounts, mostly redirected from her pension, from her RSP draws, from the sale of the house in Leduc in 2009. She'd invested conservatively, GICs, ETFs, a small amount in real estate income trusts. Nothing dramatic, just steady, careful, patient. The account balance, as of the date of her letter, was a little over $800,000, with 4 additional years of growth, just over $1.1 million. The branch manager was watching me. I think he was watching to make sure I didn't faint. I came close. "She updated us every year," he said. "She was very organized. I didn't tell anyone. Not my aunt, not my cousin, not Kira with her judgmental cat. I called the lawyer whose name was in the documents, a woman named Oakes who'd been working with my grandmother for years, and I set up an appointment. I did my due diligence. I talked to a financial advisor. I transferred what needed to be transferred. I made a plan. And then, 2 months later, I made a mistake. I don't say this to be hard on myself. I say it because it's true, and because it's the part of the story I'd change if I could go back, and because understanding it matters for what happened next. My father called me on a Sunday evening in April. This was unusual. He generally didn't call. I called him on a schedule, the way you call someone you're obligated to maintain contact with. He said he'd been thinking about my grandmother's estate, that he'd heard from someone, he didn't say who, that she'd had some savings, and that given everything he'd done over the years, raising me alone, covering my expenses, all of it, he thought it was worth having a conversation about what she'd left and whether any of it might reasonably be considered family assets. This was so breathtaking in its audacity that I went quiet for a moment. He took my silence as invitation. "I'm not saying you owe me anything," he said, in the specific tone of voice he used when he was absolutely saying I owed him something. "I'm just saying it might be worth discussing with a professional, given the circumstances of your upbringing." I made the mistake of saying, "There's more money than you think." I don't know why I said it. I think I wanted him to understand for once that something in my life was beyond his reach, that my grandmother had seen to it, that someone had made sure. But you can't say something like that to a man like him and expect it to stop there. Within 3 weeks, I had received 2 letters from his lawyer. The first suggested that, as my legal guardian and sole financial provider during my childhood years, My father may have had a legitimate claim to input on the management of any trust assets held on my behalf during my minority. I sent both letters to Oakes. She read them and called me. These have no legal merit, she said. The trust was structured precisely to avoid this, but he can make noise, and noise is expensive. How much does he know? I told her what I'd said on the phone. She was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. I think we need to be a bit strategic about this. Here's what I want to tell you about the next 4 months, because this is the part people don't show you in the movies. It was boring. It was slow. It was a lot of emails and a lot of phone calls and a lot of waiting. My father escalated. He got a second lawyer. He tried to contact my aunt. He left a voicemail with my grandmother's old bank, which, to their credit, they did not return. Nothing he tried had any basis. But that wasn't really the point, was it? The point was to make it cost something. Time, money, anxiety. The way it had always cost me something. Oakes kept me calm. She's the kind of lawyer who gives you information without performing concern. She just tells you what is and what you should do about it. I trusted her completely within about 40 minutes of meeting her. There was a point, around month 3, where my father left a voicemail for me directly. He said that he hoped I understood what I was doing to our relationship, that my grandmother had always wanted us to be close, that she would have wanted him to be taken care of too. I listened to it twice. Then I saved it to my phone and sent the audio file to Oakes. Good, she said. My cousin's engagement party was in June. She'd planned it for months. A backyard gathering at her fiancé's parents' place in Sherwood Park. About 60 people. Fairy lights strung between the trees. The kind of early summer evening that makes you remember why people stay in Alberta. She'd specifically asked my father not to be invited. He was not on the guest list. He came anyway. I don't know how he found out. My aunt's side of the family is not exactly watertight when it comes to information. But he arrived at 20 minutes past 7, walking in through the back gate like he'd been expected, holding a bottle of wine and smiling the way he smiled when he was performing normalcy. I saw him from across the yard. I had known somewhere in the back of my mind that something like this might happen. Oakes had told me to document any contact. I had my phone. I had a recording app I'd set up on her advice. I pressed record and put the phone in my shirt pocket. He worked the party for about 20 minutes before he found me. That was how he operated. He'd work a room first, establish relationships, make himself seem like someone who belonged. By the time he reached me, he'd already spoken to my cousin's future mother-in-law and 2 people I'd never met. He touched my elbow. He said, "Can we talk?" We stepped away from the group toward the back fence where the fairy lights didn't quite reach. He said he'd been talking to someone, a financial consultant, he called them, who'd told him that trust arrangements made on behalf of a minor could, under certain conditions, be subject to claims by a parent who could demonstrate financial dependency. "I've been told," he said carefully, "that the amount in question is over $1 million. He watched my face when he said it. He was always watching faces. "Where did you hear that?" I asked. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." He did the thing where he looked slightly pained, slightly reasonable. A man pushed into an unfortunate position by someone else's stubbornness. "I'm not trying to fight with you. I'm trying to have an adult conversation about something that affects both of us." Behind us, someone gave a little cheer and I heard the pop of a champagne bottle. My cousin laughed. I said, "Oakes will be reaching out to your lawyer tomorrow." He blinked. "She's been tracking every contact," I said, "including this one, including the voicemail in March, including the letter you sent to the bank." I kept my voice even. This was important to me, not cold, not triumphant, just even. Because I wasn't doing this to perform anything. I was doing it because it had to be done. There's a harassment provision in the trust documentation. You've triggered it. If you continue, you'll be liable for legal costs. He stared at me for a long moment. "You recorded this," he said. Oakes said to document contact. Something shifted in his face then. I'd seen it once or twice before, in childhood, in moments when he realized he'd miscalculated. Not anger exactly, but a kind of recalibration, a going very still. "I'm your father," he said. "I know," I said. "I know you are." I went back to the party. He left within 10 minutes. I watched him go from across the yard, and I felt not relief exactly, not victory, just something that had been wound very tight beginning slowly to release. My cousin found me at the drink table. She looked at my face. Was that? Yes, do you want to go somewhere quiet? No, I said. I want to stay here. So we stayed. We had champagne. The fairy lights came on when the sky got dark, and they looked like something out of a movie that wasn't trying too hard to be beautiful. The legal situation resolved itself within 6 weeks of the party. My father's lawyer apparently reviewed the documentation. Oakes sent over and advised him that there was no viable claim. He did not call me. He did not write. The silence was a different kind of thing to manage than the noise had been. Oakes called me on a Tuesday afternoon to tell me it was done. I was at my desk at work, eating a sandwich, and she said, "It's done. He's withdrawn. You're clear." I said, "Thank you." I put down my sandwich. I sat very still for a moment. Then I cried, which I hadn't done through any of the rest of it. I left Edmonton the following spring. I'd been thinking about it for a while. I'd always wanted to be closer to the coast. And my job had gone remote 2 years earlier, and there was nothing really holding me to the city except habit and the apartment I'd been in too long. I moved to a small town on Vancouver Island, the kind of place where people nod at each other on the street, and the grocery store closes at 8 and you can walk to the water in 15 minutes. I still have the key. It doesn't open anything now. The bank had to replace the physical components of the account documents with updated paperwork, and the wooden box is on a shelf in my new place next to a plant that needs more water than I give it. But I keep the key because it's the last physical thing she gave me. She pressed it into my palm on a dry Thursday in November, when the turkey was bad and my uncle was arguing about hockey. And she said, "Don't let anyone talk you out of it." She was right. She was always right. She just couldn't tell me the full shape of what she meant until she was gone. And by then she'd made sure I had everything I needed to figure it out. I burned the voicemail. Not literally. I deleted it, one morning in January, standing on my new porch with coffee, listening to the ocean. I'd kept it for almost a year. I didn't need it anymore. The water was gray and very cold and absolutely beautiful. I think that's what she wanted, in the end. Not for me to win anything. Not for me to get back at anyone. Just for me to end up somewhere that was mine. That couldn't be taken, couldn't be talked down, couldn't be managed or negotiated away. I think about her every time I walk to the water. I think about a woman who spent 30 years, quietly, methodically, making sure that one day I would have the ground to stand on. I've been standing on it ever since.